Good evening. Uh, we'd like to invite those in the back, if you don't mind. Why don't you try to find a seat so that we're all seated? We have plenty of seats, I think. So we'd be good to have you there. Um, and we want to welcome you. We're so glad so many of you come to this Reed Knox Forum. Before we start, we want to thank Central Michigan Youth for Christ for allowing us to use this space. We want to emphasize also that Youth for Christ is providing the space for this event, but does not take a position on any of the issues that are being discussed. If you appreciate Youth for Christ for providing this space, however, we would encourage you to make a donation in the jar being held up in the back of the middle row, and we really would like to support them. They aren't charging us, but we like Youth for Christ and would like to support them. So we'd appreciate if people give donations there. For those of you who have not attended one of these Reed Knox forums, we also want to briefly explain the name and the history of these. We've been doing these, some of you know, in the community for the last 3 years, focusing on each forum on a crucial policy issue that seems relevant to the city, county, the region. The Reed Knox Forum, in case you don't know, is a series named for an Alma College alum, couple from long ago. She was the class of 1898, who were lifelong Republicans, Annie Reed and her husband, Frank Knox. Knox was a very active Republican political figure, and eventually in 1936, his highest run for office was as vice president on the Republican ticket that year when he ran against a Democratic ticket headed by a guy named Franklin Roosevelt, and they lost solidly. Despite being a leading national critic of Roosevelt, for example, he opposed the new Social Security that had just been put into effect. Knox began to praise Roosevelt for his leadership in confronting fascism. As World War II approached, Knox backed Roosevelt increasingly in his support for U.S. preparedness. And eventually, we're explaining why we have forums that are about policy. Please. And so Knox then agreed to come into the Roosevelt administration and served as Secretary of the Navy, dying essentially on the job from overwork in 1944. So we named the forums for the couple who are such a good example of people who give themselves to national and community causes, and while they're very highly engaged in a party, put country above party. Tonight's process, if I can just explain a little of that before we get going. While we know the topic tonight is controversial, this is not an advocacy meeting, but one to provide basic information on immigration law, asylum, and the possibility that we will be housing in the community some unaccompanied migrant youth. We'd urge you to be respectful of others and as quiet as possible when others might be speaking. We're beginning the presentation on immigration law, focusing especially, I think, on asylum and what that means. At the end of that presentation, we will be entertaining questions of our presenter, I'll introduce in a couple moments. And also, we have several people here from Bethany Christian Services who can answer questions specifically about that facility. Some of you know this from when you came in, you were handed a card, but just to explain the questioning process, to allow for as many different questions as possible to be answered, we are asking you to write your questions on index cards. After you write a question, please pass it to the end of the middle row so people can pick it up. We have people who will be, during the evening, picking those up. They're going to bring them up to the table that you see over here, I guess on your right, and they will simply put them together in sort of an organized form. If we get similar questions before they get asked, they may combine 2 or 3 cards. There are people also watching this remotely, so if you see cards pop up, they're being written in the back off of what are sent in on the web. If you didn't get any cards, or if you use a card and don't have any more left and need a pen or a pencil, raise your hand and the people will come down the middle aisle and distribute those to you. As you will see, again, all the cards are being sorted up here. You will see we're going to go through them. We're going to try to get to all. If by chance we don't, you do not have to put your name or contact information on a card. You can make them anonymous, but if you want to be assured of getting an answer, especially if you think there are a lot of cards coming in, if you don't mind and want to put contact information on the cards, we have pledged that we will get answers for your cards. I mean, it'll be sent to you, electronically or whatever address you give us. Basically, that's our procedures for the evening. Again, we really would urge you to try to be respectful of each other. I think most of us live in this community. We're neighbors, friends, whatever. We may have a different view on the issues being discussed, but please try to be respectful of each other. And, we don't want to ask anyone to leave, but we will have to if people are disruptive. And now, to begin, before we begin the presentations, the Reverend Fred Thalen has agreed to give an invocation.
So, thank you. Thank you, Ed. And I retired 2 years ago from a parish in Lansing, and I feel really comfortable here tonight, or I feel really at home, I should say, because just like my church, nobody wants to sit in the front row. So, but let us begin with just a moment of a prayer here. Good and gracious God, God of all creation, we give you thanks for your loving presence among us here tonight. We ask you to send down your spirit of love upon us, your spirit of wisdom and understanding, your spirit of invitation to come together in dialogue, to come together in a spirit of opening our hearts to one another, in a spirit of compassion, in a spirit of just walking together as brothers and sisters. We ask you to bless this gathering here tonight. May it be a time of growing in the ways of your love, in the ways of your creative spirit that seeks to draw us together as one. Amen.
Thank you, Father Fred. Our presenter on immigration law tonight is Pamela Davies. Following Ms. Davies' presentation, she will be willing to take questions about immigration law, I think, in the asylum process. Ms. Davies, I want to emphasize, is not an attorney for Bethany Christian Services. I guess that's why I'm sitting in the middle here, separating. But in any case, she's not an attorney for them. But when she is done, if there are questions that relate more to Bethany, since she is not familiar with their facility, we have a panel of people from Bethany who might answer those questions. You can ask either type. We're glad to have that, but they're not doing really presentations, but they are here to answer questions. Pamela Davies is an immigration attorney in Lansing, Michigan, serving clients from all over the U.S. and the world. She is a U.S. citizen. She was born in Manila in the Philippines and raised in Toronto, Canada. Ms. Davies promotes justice and awareness through active membership in community organizations, including Advocates and Leaders for Police and Community Trust, Immigrant and Refugee Resource Collaborative, and the Mid-Michigan Immigration Coalition. Additionally, Ms. Davies serves as a member of Congresswoman Lisa Slotkin's Immigration Advisory Board and is co-chair of the Lansing Mayor Shore's Criminal Justice and Public Safety Work Group. And without any maybe further comments, I'll introduce Ms. Davies.
Thank you for having me here today. What an impressive crowd. This really is a testament to your interest and passion for the issues of immigration. And I hope I can share some information with you today that may answer or clear up any misconceptions that you may have about unaccompanied children, okay? Please hold your questions till the very end, just for the sake of efficiency. So again, my purpose here tonight is to provide information. I'm not trying to persuade you to do anything. I'm just stating some information and facts regarding migrants at the border and some legal concepts that relate to it, okay? So let's begin with understanding exactly what an unaccompanied child is. They are children that are less than 18 years old, and they don't have lawful status in the United States, and they don't have a parent that is in the United States or somebody that can provide for them, or a parent that can provide for them in the United States that is available. All right? So unaccompanied children are mostly referred to as the children coming from the border, and not the Mexican children and the Canadian children, unless they are claiming asylum or unless they are victims of trafficking. All right, so the Mexicans and the Canadian children that do come, even though they are technically, if they come unaccompanied, they are processed a little quicker to get repatriated back to their home. So I want to, every time I speak to you on a topic, I want to give you examples so that it's easier to grasp the concepts, because immigration is very complex. But I was in court one day, and there was a respondent who had said to the judge, she's a Canadian, all right, and she was claiming asylum. And the judge clearly said, I don't even want to hear that, because nobody's going to believe that you're claiming asylum in Canada, okay? So that's part of the reason, too, that it's very difficult to come into the United States and say you're claiming asylum into Canada, because Canada does not persecute its citizens, all right? All right, so why do children leave their homeland? That is a very hard question to ask, and it's a very, very difficult topic and issue. And the reason for that, I believe, is because as Americans, and I am an American, it is very hard for us to understand what these people are going through, because we have been in the luxury of security, freedom, great laws. And our safety here seems very secure. We trust our officers. We trust our government. And, oh, you don't? Okay. All right. Maybe that was a blanket of a statement. But if you knew what other governments were like, you're going to love your government. I promise you. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about government later, okay? All right, so why do they leave their homeland? It's usually a life or death situation at home, okay? And what I'm referring to is children are being involuntarily recruited into gangs. They're escaping extreme violence and extreme poverty. Poverty in the sense where they can't feed themselves. They can't feed their children. They don't have clothes to wear, and they don't have a job to go to so that they can provide for themselves. They don't have medicines, okay? So parents often encourage their children, and I've spoken to many where the parents actually do encourage their children to leave without them. And this isn't because they want to be abandoned or because they are neglectful or, it's not, the only reason they're encouraging it is out of love. It's very hard for us to understand that, but if you can imagine a situation where you would send your child off on their own, by themselves, with strangers, because the chances of survival staying is null, okay, versus that slim chance of happiness and opportunities making it across, all right? I bet most of us have children here. I can't imagine sending my child off unless I was that desperate, okay? Okay. Please. Yeah, let's be, okay, I understand this is very controversial, but let me get through my presentation, and I promise I will take your questions. I promise. All right. So, the Immigration and Nationality Act, it authorizes the detention of non-U.S. nationals while unaccompanied children are in the removal process and they're waiting for their asylum claims or immigration relief to be considered. The Department of Health and Human Services, for the CDC, allows the Department of Homeland Security to rapidly expel individuals without valid documents, okay? When I say valid documents, that means without a proper passport, a green card, or a visa to enter into our country. And they also have the right to rapidly expel those that are at the border that they encounter. However, in 2020, due to a federal judge ruling, that was halted where it pertains to unaccompanied children. And then in February 2021, President Biden made it official that you couldn't do that to unaccompanied children. All right? Are unaccompanied children illegally present in the U.S.? They're not. And I'll tell you why. We have laws that allow them to be legally present in the United States. Processing of unaccompanied children at the border are controlled by the Flores Settlement Agreement and federal statutes and regulations. I want to make sure you understand the terminology. There's legal presence and there's legal status. Legal presence is established when laws allow an individual, an unaccompanied minor, to be in the U.S. while they're seeking relief, while they're seeking benefits for immigration. Legal status is established after being granted that immigration relief or benefit. Okay? So you have your green card holders that have legal status. You have your tourists, you have your international students, you've got your professors, you've got your workers, your farmers. They all have legal status, all right? So just to make sure you understand it, if you have legal presence, it doesn't mean you have legal status. Not yet. Remember, you're waiting. You're waiting, you're working on a benefit or a relief. However, if you already have legal status in the United States, then of course you also have legal presence. So please be mindful of when you say that these unaccompanied children are here illegally. Okay. So what happens at the border? Let's talk about what happens at the border. Have you been to the border? Okay. So what happens? Let's please be respectful. I'll answer your question, I promise, at the end. Okay? All right. So what happens at the border? You have Customs and Border Patrol who apprehends, who processes, and initially detains unaccompanied children found along the border. And if they're found to be an unaccompanied child, then that child must, by law, we're law-abiding folks, right? Be transferred to the Office of Refugee Resettlement within 72 hours. ICE, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, transports unaccompanied children to the ORR, okay? And the ORR finds shelter anywhere in the United States to house these unaccompanied children. In Michigan, we have Bethany Christian Services. And we also have Samaritas, okay? These are non-secure state licensed facilities. Non-secure meaning least restrictive, okay? Unaccompanied children are released if there is a family member or another sponsor to release them to. So let's play this out. At the border, we have Juanita. A 13-year-old is found at Nogales, Arizona, and she is apprehended and detained by Border Police, Border Patrol. She is designated as an unaccompanied child. Remember, that's somebody who's under 18, without legal status, and without a parent or legal guardian available to provide care and custody. ICE comes and picks her up, transfers Juanita to ORR, who then finds a bed for Juanita in the U.S. at Bethany Christian Services. Bethany cares for the child until Juanita can be released to a family member. So with the influx of children at the border, Bethany needs more shelter, like that here in Alma. to house these children until they can be reunified with their family. Okay, and it's my understanding that their stay here will be less than, it's approximately like 40, 45 days, right? Okay, so when do lawyers get involved in this process? There are two types of relief. Immigration relief refers to a way to keep the children here from deportation. That's what relief is, all right? So through the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, the acronym for that is USCIS, a child applies for asylum affirmatively, okay, within the first year of entry, and has to express a fear of returning to their country because A, they've been harmed, or B, they fear being harmed or killed upon return on account of 5 things. At least one of 5 things. Because of their race, because of their nationality, because of their religion, their political opinion, or because they're a member to a particular group. Those are the 5 protected grounds for asylum. So, children south of the border, Honduras, Guatemalans, Salvadorans, and children from as far away as Cameroon, India, and China are escaping extreme violence and gangs and cartels and even their own governments, okay? And they're first getting to Central America, and they're entering through Mexico to get to the United States. Not protected grounds for asylum would be natural disasters, economic hardship, or widespread random violence. Okay, that's not protected by asylum. So, the next step after the child applies for asylum, there is an interview set in Chicago. If they are a resident of Michigan or different part, actually Chicago Asylum Office has a very huge jurisdiction. If you apply for asylum, you end up doing this interview in Chicago where the officer is very sensitive and trained to hearing out the claim of the child. And that claim, that child has to express exactly their fear of returning home, okay? They share that story with the asylum officer, and you can imagine how daunting that is, because children are under the age of 18, all right? So you can have a 5-year-old, you can have a 7-year-old. These are not, well-articulated individuals, so it very much helps to have an attorney with them to represent them. The asylum officer's job is to decide whether the child's claim is credible and meritorious and therefore needs protection from the United States. The outcome of this interview could be either it's denied, or either the officer can't make a decision, or it's granted. So I want to give you an example of asylum. We have Lance, okay? Lance is from China. Lance traveled to Guatemala so he can get to Mexico to the United States. He is Uyghur. Uyghur is a Muslim minority group in China. He claims that he fears returning to China because the government is placing Uyghurs in re-education camps in Xinjiang, China. Here, children have been taken from their families and tortured into renouncing their faith. I highly encourage you to look into that because it does exist. It exists today, okay? Their families have no information on this child's whereabouts, their well-being, or whether they're dead or alive, okay? And Lance had an excellent asylum claim. Why? Because he expressed 2 protected grounds. 1, his religion, he's Muslim. Secondly, he has a particular social group, which is his Uyghur ethnicity. Well, he got granted asylum 3 weeks after the interview. Okay, and once you're granted asylum, remember, when he came in, he didn't have status, but he had legal presence. Once he gets granted asylum, he now has legal status. as an asylee. If Lance were denied or the asylum officer couldn't decide on his claim, then it goes to the immigration court, where Lance now can express his claim. De novo is the term, where the judge hears the claim fresh eyes, no prejudice from any interviews in the past or any determinations from the past, okay? How is it different? So initially, it was in Chicago in an office where an asylum officer is hearing him out. Now it's a defensive claim, meaning now he's fighting in a legal sense so that his claim can be heard and he can be granted asylum. But meanwhile, in court, as you know, you have a respondent, you have a prosecutor, and you have a judge. So now it's a defensive claim because he has the ICE prosecuting attorney whose job it is to make sure that the asylum claim is denied, all right? If it gets granted by the judge, great. If it gets denied, Lance has an opportunity to appeal this case, thus the extended period of time in courts because of appeals and the overwhelmed docket of immigration court, okay? So the next type of relief that is often claimed by our unaccompanied children is known as the special juvenile immigrant. Here, a child is in the United States, but under 21 years old. So remember, the other one was under 18, so they might have been an unaccompanied child, but then they aged out of that and is now under 21 and can petition for special immigrant juvenile. But this child has to be unmarried, and the child has to be declared by a state court or in the custody of the state, like a state agency, department, or a state-appointed agency or individual, and the court determines that this child has been abandoned, neglected, or abused, and it's also been determined that it's not in the best interest of the child to go back home. Okay? So the child therefore goes through two courts, the state court and then the immigration court, where an actual order is placed stating exactly that the judge in the state court says it's a family court, probate court, whichever one takes cases that refer to or deal with children in their best interest, okay? But they make a court order saying this child has been abused, neglected, or abandoned, and it's not in their best interest to go home. So again, let's play this out. We'll use Maria, all right? Maria's story goes like this. Keep in mind, Maria has a brother that came earlier to the United States as an unaccompanied child and was housed with either Bethany or Samaritas. Her older brother left because of what we commonly hear about gang recruits, okay? So let's talk about common stories, because just because it's common, it doesn't mean it's not true, right? I think Jews can tell you that, right? There were millions of them that were persecuted. Same story. Didn't mean it wasn't true, all right? So anyway, her older brother left Guatemala because he was fleeing gang recruitment. He was Christian, and he didn't want to do what the gangs were making him do. That was committing violence, committing crimes in general, stealing, and drug smuggling. He just didn't want to do it, all right? But it's not as if they're trying to recruit you and you just say, you know, I don't want to join your gang. It doesn't happen that way. It's pretty vicious. You don't join their gang, they threaten you. They threaten your life. They threaten your families, okay? So years later, Maria came to the United States. She's 14 years old, but she had a different story, okay? What she left behind was She was not in school at the age of 10 or 11 years old. Why? Because in Guatemala, after this time, after this age, tuition is not free. I mean, schooling is not free, and therefore tuition is required. And mom was a single mom, and her father died of alcoholism. And therefore, she was forced to work full-time at this tender age with her mom, cleaning houses and cooking for employers, all right? But one time, she was abused by her employer, all right? Mom couldn't say anything about it because she's living in extreme poverty. And to complain to your employer about abusing your child meant you lost your job. All right, these are desperate situations. So, and don't we help them? Okay, so anyway, so then what we have then is a child here who's very tender, who's also been abused, and cannot complain to an employer because she herself relies on the income, okay? So her journey, before I talk about her journey, it became finally so unbearable that her mother encouraged her to go to the United States by means of hiring a coyote. A coyote is a trafficker, all right? This is desperation. Desperate people do desperate things, okay? This coyote put her only daughter, in a semi-truck, a non-ventilated trailer, packed with other immigrants, okay? She traveled through Guatemala and got through Mexico by busing, by other trailer tractors, and finally makes it out here. When she arrived, she was determined to be an unaccompanied child, thus in the government's custody, until she was placed in a state-licensed facility like Bethany before being released to her brother. Long story short, there was an American family, a teacher who knew her brother, met her, fell in love with her, and decided to be a legal guardian. And with that process, I did help them, and because she became a legal guardian, she was also a state ward, and therefore was able to petition for special immigrant juvenile and was granted. So again, what we have is somebody who came initially as an unaccompanied child with no status, became legally present, and now has legal status once she gets her adjustment of status through court. All right. So that's my little spiel for you today. I hope that was informative, and I hope you have questions, because I am happy to answer any. Yes, sir.
I got one question.
Please.
These kids are legal in this country.
Legally present.
My understanding of international law, and even our law, says that if you cross more than one border, you lose that ship where you're a legal citizen or legal immigrant. Otherwise, they can't apply for citizenship here because they cross more than one border to get here. You have to apply in the first country that you come to before you leave. So, in other countries, including Venezuela, all these countries, all those kids are not legal.
Well, they are legally present here. I'm not sure what you're talking about, a transit law, right? Yeah, we're not, that's not being implemented right now, okay?
That is very much a part of what we're dealing with, because that would take away all these kids' rights.
Okay, so when they transit through these countries are the same countries where its citizens are trying to get to America. So clearly, they didn't feel like those countries were as safe. Well, actually, the laws, I'm sorry, one at a time. Thank you. Oh, that's right. That's right. Thank you for reminding me. But to address you, because I've already started, we have laws in our United States that are protecting these children. Okay.
I'm not arguing about protecting the children.
I sure hope, folks, with all your passion, that you are voting and that you're going to the hearings and really speaking to your senators and your Congress folks. Address it. You know, that's what they're there for. That's what they're there for. Oh, I can read it. It's fine. Okay, so let's see what we got. All right, so we got here. All right, is it okay if I read out the names that asked the questions? Are you okay with that, or do you want it anonymous? It's all good with me. So if these minors have left their family in Central America, what is the purpose of locating family in the U.S.? There is no logic in this procedure, as their own family has, in a sense, abandoned them, or they have been trafficked. Okay, let's see the first part. If these minors have left their family in Central America. Okay, so let's remember, not everybody leaves Central America because of their family, right? There is no logic in this proceeding, as their own family has, in a sense, abandoned them, or they have been trafficked. I'm not... Okay, so you're saying by, like, what the example I gave you with a coyote? Oh, okay. All right, I'm glad. Let's talk about that. So remember what we're talking about. We're talking about desperate people who don't have means to get their child here, except for a coyote, who could be a bad person, who could be a decent person. All right? So, with that, it is the child's only chance to get to America. That is how desperate they are. Oh, okay, folks, listen. Lady in the blue, I think there are cards in the back. I want to answer your question. Go write it down. Okay, all right. Can these children become U.S. citizens? Yes. And what is the cost involved in applying for citizenship? Okay, so yes, these children can become U.S. citizens once they establish lawful status in the United States. They have to wait. If you become a permanent resident, you have to wait 5 years as a lawful permanent resident before you can apply for U.S. citizenship. The cost does go up and down with every, whatever time, whatever, like anything, pricing, right? Government fees and then legal fees vary depending on the attorney. There are pro bono attorneys. So it depends. Whoever asked this, and if you're interested in helping somebody become a citizen, I'm happy to help, give answers, or refer you to people, however you want to do it. Okay. Okay, hang on a minute. Please. Okay. Please get a card. Okay. So will these children be able to return to their country of origin? It depends, okay? It depends. So with asylum, remember, there is a fear of persecution based on the 5 protected grounds. So if they are granted asylum status and they become a lawful permanent resident in the U.S. after a year of being an asylee, and then eventually they become a citizen, and they are free to go anywhere in the world, even as a lawful permanent resident. It's very risky to go back to your homeland. You don't lose that permanent residence because you went back to your homeland. Country conditions change. Sometimes you're at war, sometimes you're not at war. When it's safe, people go home. That's pretty reasonable. Okay? All right, let's see. Why not send these children back to their parents or family members who sent them in the first place and use the 1,155,600 to help them house and educate them with people who speak their language and understand their needs? Okay, so that's a good question for your representatives, guys. All right? You want to use your funds a certain way?
We're asking you
One more question. I have one more question, and then Bethany.
Everyone has a fair opportunity to ask their question. Write your question on a card and submit it. This is a meeting to allow people to get questions answered. It is not an advocacy meeting for anybody on any side. It's to get questions answered. So write your question on a card and we will answer it. You don't know which card has been asked, so please, so that we don't have to ask people to stop and leave, please wait for questions to be answered. We have a lot of questions. It may not be your card. You may have asked a similar question. So don't assume your question isn't being answered. We're doing them in the order they've received. We are going to switch in a couple moments and also do some questions for Bethany, but we'll finish this initial stack and then we have more.
Okay, so the next question, and it is a good one. What connection do the children have with the coyotes that help bring them? Do they now owe anything to them? So typically, the coyotes are commissioned by the parent or a family member to take them across, okay? Do they owe them anything? I'm pretty sure they aren't normally able to pay everything up front, all right? Remember, they are not rich folks, but they will do what they can. And it's not that, I just want you to realize that this coyote business is a desperate one. This is not where people want to send their children, okay? So do they now owe them anything? I think some people do owe coyotes something, and it could even be their life, all right? But the chance of getting their child across and that risk, again, of safety and happiness is worth the effort. So, Krista, do you have questions you want to answer? Go ahead.
Well, I guess why don't we switch a little, because we do have some questions for Bethany. We have some more for Miss Davies, but we'll maybe to give your voice a chance to recover. Why don't we do a few of the Bethany questions?
Hi, my name is Krista Stevens. I'm the executive branch director working on this proposed program.
Good evening. My name is Hannah Orozco. I am our national director for all of our refugee and immigrant children's programs.
Lucas Mkowski. I'm one of the branch directors in Michigan at Bethany Christian Services, and I've been working with this population for versions of this population for 15 years. This exact population and the exact kind of program that we're proposing for the facility here, I believe it's for about 8 years. So I've had daily contact with the program and with the individuals there, so I'm happy to be able to speak about those experiences. I'm assuming I'm seeing some of the questions coming in, so I'm assuming like a main question that you all have, and I understand this, is this a safe program to have in your community? Are these safe youth to have in our community? So thank you. Let me answer. So again, I've had daily contact with this exact population for 8 years in a row, have worked in these programs for 15 years, so with these kids, and I will answer you point blank that I have 3 young kids, okay? I have a 12-year-old daughter. So let me repeat that. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and I would, without hesitation, welcome a program like this directly next door to me. Directly next door. I would have no problem with that at all. These kids are safe, and they would be safe enough to live directly next door to my 12-year-old daughter that I love.
Well, and I'll clarify, these children are not adoptable. That's okay. Which is why we're here to talk to you all. We want to answer your questions and provide... When you're done. I wanted to take a chance to back us up a minute. So there was a question asked about when children are fleeing from their home country and they come here and we're identifying family members in the United States to care for them, how does that work, right? So I want to take us back a little bit about how this program was created. So we have immigration laws in the United States that not just allow but require that when children enter, that they are cared for in a child-friendly facility and manner. That means that they're cared for at the developmental age and appropriateness of a 7-year-old or a 5-year-old, sometimes a 12 and 15-year-old. So children leave their home countries, come to the United States. Previously, they were entering a detention facility with adults. Then eventually there was litigation and lawsuit that then said that these children had to be placed in these child-friendly facilities. So then it was diverted. Yes, 5 and 7-year-olds. Not here, but in the policy. So instead of children being housed with adults in jail centers, this program was created under the Office of Refugee Resettlement, where children were placed in child-friendly facilities. And if you saw these children's faces, you would understand why they should not be in adult detention centers. Because no child deserves to be detained. No child. Your child, my child, anyone's children deserves to be detained. We all, as proud people of your community, of my community, understand the power of family. There is power and great importance in family. And at Bethany, our purpose, our mission is to put children in family units as quickly as we can for a temporary period of time until we can get them reunified with their family. So as we heard from Pamela, they have legal presence in our country. Thank you for making your opinion heard, but we just talked to a lawyer, but the laws say that children are allowed to enter our country and have legal presence here. If you have an issue with the law, we are the wrong people to advocate with. I'm working on it. They have legal presence in the United States, and they are allowed a period of time to obtain legal status. Instead of the government housing them for that entire 2 years. Exactly. So in order to reduce that cost, in order to reduce the cost of caring for kids, we want them to be with their family. It's important that they're with their family. It's important that they're not housed in government detention centers for years, or that we pay for it. So instead, actually, we reunify them with their family members, whomever that might be here in the United States, where we vet them, we interview them, we understand who they are and why they're motivated to care for these young people. They then become legally responsible for ensuring that they are safe and cared for and attend school and follow through with their legal process. And that is how this program works.
Please, we are trying to answer questions. You can later debate whether you like an answer. You can write us a follow-up question, but there's no way we can carry on a discussion, a question and answer with people shouting an opinion about something. It's okay to have your opinion. Write a question related to that opinion and turn it in. Do not keep shouting out an idea that you have. It's okay to have your idea, but don't shout it out and try to force the rest to listen when they're trying to hear a presenter.
Thank you.
Turn in a question.
I'm going to answer this first question here on this card that says, why are these children unaccompanied and how do you find their families? So I'm going to speak to this as I directly have also worked in this program. I started as a case manager in this program. I also supervised a residential facility of 18 teenage boys. This is the same exact population in Grand Rapids. These children are unaccompanied, again, as we heard from Pamela. That's how they're legally classified. They are children that are under 18 without predetermined lawful immigration status before they enter our country. So once they enter, they're then deemed an unaccompanied child, and then they enter legal proceedings, so they have legal presence. We find their families through a process called family reunification. On site at programming, we do interviews with the child to understand their lived experience, their life history. Where do you come from? Who did you live with? Who were your loved ones? What was school like? Did you work? Who are your siblings? Who lives here in the United States that you know or that you have connections with? We identify a family member, and most often, almost every single child has some type of contact information for a family member. I came here and I know my uncle lives here, or my mom, or my cousin. Sometimes if it's a young child, they might actually have that phone number written on the inside of their belt so that they don't forget that phone number. We call those family members and we do the same process, and we interview them and do an assessment, and that's a sponsor. Excuse me. So we do a sponsor assessment. We understand who they are as a family member to this child. Do you work? Do you have the financial ability to care for this child? Do you understand the implications and requirements to care for a child? Do you know how to navigate your community to make sure this child has access to a doctor and a school and a psychologist? Because more times than not, almost every single child that comes into our country has gone through some form of trauma. Just being away from family and separated is traumatizing in itself. And so making sure that they then have the resources to be cared for once they're reunified with their family member. We make a recommendation. We are just an agency that makes an assessment, and we make a recommendation to the federal government saying, here's a family member that's willing to care for this child. This child should be released and with their family. That family member then becomes legally responsible to care for that child. And to answer your question, at times we are required to do DNA tests, but not all the time. Thank you. Let me finish explaining. They're desperate family members. They're desperate family members that are very, very relieved that their children or that their nieces and nephews are here safely. During the family reunification process, to ensure that it's a family member and to verify relationship, which is required of us, the government requires that there is some form of verification of relationship. We have to require documentation that shows a trail of link of birth certificates, that also includes vaccination records, school records, communion records, like all sorts of things. If there's any records that they can show us, we have to collect that. No, we know where, at times their parents, we know where they are, and actually we talk to them. But they're saying that it's unsafe for their children to return to their home country. We use that documentation, a trail of birth certificates, to show relationship with whomever that they are being reunified, and that's their sponsor. That sometimes includes marriage certificates, if it's a married-in uncle, but we have to show an entire documented trail of birth certificates or relationship to that child. Once we're able to make a determination that it is a safe placement in an adult that's properly motivated to care for this child, we make that recommendation to the federal government. In the Office of Refugee Resettlement, they make the final determination of whether or not that child can be released from care. 14 to 17. Excuse me, sorry, 12 to 17. You want to take a question?
Yeah, so I can answer a little bit of that. In order to move forward with this program, we have to go through the rezoning process, which is what we're in the middle of right now. We also have to go through the state of Michigan licensing process. And so our state of Michigan license requested that we be approved for ages 12 to 17. So we are not approved for that. We're in the middle of that. We just started that process. The rezoning process was step one for us, but we did request 12 to 17. I have a question here that asks, why 12 to 17 and why boys? Because that is the highest need That is what we are seeing at the border as the highest, and so we are here to meet that need, bottom line. It's not more complicated than that. All right. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah. As a process of the family reunification process, right? So our job is to assess the child and their needs, assess the sponsor and their ability to meet the needs of that child, and provide proof of relationship and appropriate motivation. Every child that goes through our program, we are required to find some form of identification. Sometimes that's a birth certificate, sometimes we can't get it. So sometimes it's a school photo ID, which then we have to submit to their consulate for verification. So we submit documents to the consulate from the country of which they come from to verify their information. And there are times when that is inaccurate. I actually have a memory of a client that I worked with who had 2 birth certificates and didn't know it. He didn't know it. And so when we went to verify it with the consulate, he was actually 17 and thought he was 15. Right? So our job is to ensure that information. And so we partner with our legal entities here in the United States, as well as the countries from which they come from, their consulate, to verify their age. If for some reason there are no documents, we are required to do an age determination test. That looks like a bone density test or dental x-rays. Really uncomfortable processes that kids have to go through to prove that they are under the age of 18. But we have to do that if they're unable to provide documentation.
I'm going to try and pivot us a little bit, drill down a little bit to location-specific questions. I have several here in front of me. I think I've gotten this question a lot when interacting with the community, so I want to make sure we don't miss that. It's easy to hover at the high level, which is very reasonable, but I want to make sure that we also kind of get program-specific question answered. A question I have here is, what are the ages? That's 12 to 17. Another question that we most commonly get is, what happens when a child turns 18? They cannot stay in our short-term shelter any longer. They go elsewhere. They do not stay in Alma. They go with a long-term foster family. These foster families do not exist in Alma. To my knowledge, they do not exist in mid-Michigan. To my knowledge, they oftentimes are not even in Michigan. So they don't stay in Alma. That's not what our program is equipped for, and our goal is to meet the need. So that's why they're moved elsewhere. The state of Michigan, in particular, every state has their own governing laws. The state of Michigan requires every foster parent to go through a licensing process themselves. So they themselves are vetted, they themselves go through background checks, etc. Happy to answer those questions after, if anybody has clarifying questions about that process. What that looks like is that 18-year-old then lives with that long-term foster parent as they pursue the asylum process, as they pursue their legal rights, as it were, in the United States. That's what that process looks like. I have another question here that I'm happy to answer about the contract. So Bethany Christian Services works with a variety of contracts. This short-term shelter, the contract is for working with the federal government on a 1 to 3 year cycle. We are anticipating that will be a 3-year cycle, which is a pretty common contract cycle. Again, this is not just Bethany Christian Services, this is all the fellow nonprofits. Bethany is a drop in that bucket, if you will. All right, so the question is, why do you need a 3-year contract? The reason is we want to be able to serve children for that length of time, if not longer, but we are discussing the 3-year contract at this time. The actual facility, we're pursuing licensure for 36 beds. What that means is that we can have up to 36 boys in the home at any given time. This is a short-term shelter, therefore they do not stay long. They stay on average 45 days, and then we are able to successfully reunite them with their family or their sponsor 95% of the time. Again, a lot of that is not in Michigan. A lot of times that's outside Michigan, and definitely not in Alma. So the 3-year contract is essentially to serve children for 3 years in an ongoing fashion. That's the simplest way. So because children are not in the shelter for very long, they're coming in and out and we're getting them to their home. So hopefully that kind of fills in the gap of the cycle.
Just one moment, please. We have sitting up here, I think it's like 40 questions on cards, and one person sent a card that's for me and not for the rest of our panel, and I want to read this. They said, lots of people want to hear, and we can't hear the speakers when people are shouting out and interrupting. So 40 of you have at least on one occasion used the card. Please use cards. Don't try to shout out your opinion over anybody. This is both sides.
Thanks, Ed. No, thanks, I appreciate it. So hopefully that answers your question about the contract cycle, why we're requesting it that way, the baseline for that, kids coming and going and getting back to their sponsors. Again, it is ages 12 to 17. If you guys want to read one of your questions, I think I got
There's some questions related to supervision. It's a 24/7 supervision, so it is a 24/7 supervised program. So this is specifically what that means is that for every 6 youth in care, there's at least one staff member that's available to provide supervision. It is not a jail, nor is it meant to be set up like a jail. The populations that we're working with don't need that kind of security, but it is supervised 24/7, even during night, which we refer to as third shift, where there would be a staff member, often 2 staff members per unit. We have 2 18-bed units, so not to confuse with the 36 number, there's 2 18-bed units where we'd have 2 staff on each side that are staying awake and doing bed checks at night. The bed checks are done primarily to ensure that the youth are safe and that there's no issues going on. It's also because we're working with youth who've experienced trauma. We're paying attention to their sleep patterns. If we have youth who are having disruptive sleep or nightmares, that's information that then is passed along to therapists so that they can support them with that. Because of the laws and regulations, the program is completely cameraed. So all areas where the youth congregate are cameraed. That, again, is not for reasons of safety because of the youth, but to monitor safety for the youth, to ensure that they're receiving appropriate care. The camera system is available to all management, including individuals like myself who have access to it at any point to review or look at recorded footage to ensure that the youth are safe and being cared for. This isn't, I'm going on a little tangent. This isn't answering the question, but I think this is helpful to know. I'll give you an example of the stuff I see when I review the camera footage. I was sharing with someone earlier today that was here. Like the other day, I reviewed the camera footage on the exact same program, the exact same population that we're looking at the program here. And it was during chore time, and there was a group of boys that were doing their chores. And while they were doing their chores, they were singing the Beach Boys. I don't remember the exact song, but literally they were singing in English. They were singing the Beach Boys and singing along while they were doing their chores. So legitimately, that's the kind of youth that are in these programs. Honest to God. But it is a 24/7, always supervised program. You are correct. The doors are not locked. This is not a jail. The doors are not locked. We don't have youth who leave. We don't have youth who leave. They're in the process of us helping them reunify with family members. Why would they want to leave the program without staff? So they stay with staff 24/7. And primarily, even the majority of the activities and everything is done within the program itself. So I hope I answered that question. There is a question here, and this is a really, really good one. There's not a name on here, but I'm glad this was asked about. So the Warwick Living Center and its closure, will positions be offered to individuals that work there or that had worked there? And I think that's a really good thing to bring up. So we do want a majority of the staff that work there to be bilingual, so especially if there's bilingual Spanish, English-speaking individuals who had worked there would be great. Not all the staff have to be bilingual, and we would absolutely welcome individuals applying for positions there that either previously worked there or just from the community. This program is going to offer over 50 jobs to folks within this community or in the surrounding community. And then training to perform these duties, there's a rigorous training curriculum that's available. It includes over 40 annual hours. I'm very happy to share with you all the training that's involved. It's pretty intensive and it's ongoing. The 40 hours is, I forgot if I said if it's annual. There's an upfront training, and then there's annual that's continuous and ongoing, as well as monitored by individuals at Bethany Christian Services who've been doing this work for a long time. We are state licensed through MDHHS, so it's monitored. The training as well as the program itself is monitored at a state level. They do quarterly visits and monitoring of us, as well as anytime there's a complaint, they come on site to review that. And they're welcome to stop by unannounced at any point. And by law, they actually, even for our monitoring visits, they have to show up unannounced. On top of that, we have oversight from what's called a VOLAG, which is an additional monitoring agency that does both desk monitoring as well as come out and does on-site monitoring of training and program and regulations. And then on top of that, the Office of Refugee Resettlement does continuous monitoring. They're on site all the time reviewing the programming, going through the files, interviewing staff, and interviewing clients.
Lucas, I can get to that question in a second. Lucas, do you want to, for those who haven't read the attachment, there's a document in the back explaining a lot of different things. There's a fast fact sheet as well as some others, but are you willing to explain what I've been calling the leveling system? So the level that the short-term shelter is at, meaning it's not a high security, it's not high-risk kiddos, and elaborate on that a little bit, because that is a common question I get.
Yeah, well. in terms of group care facilities, so the non-foster care, so the group congregate care, this would be considered the lowest level of care, the lowest risk program. So this is the alternative. I may have said this already, so forgive me if I did. This is the alternative to the massive hundreds of youth in a facility, or the youth who may be in a facility where there could be locks on the doors or there could be other staff. Those aren't the kind of youth who come to a program like this. So if you're trying to compare programs as well that are along those lines, this is just different.
Yep. And to add to that, the way that I've been explaining it, because I know we recognize that we use terminology that sometimes is foreign, so for the sake of making sure we're all on the same page, I think defining it clearly is important. So Lucas said, this is lowest level security, and what that means is that we're not taking children into this shelter unless they demonstrate low level of risk, right? They've all been through trauma. That is absolutely true, as would be true of any child that is removed from their country and family of origin. But the thing about these children is they are assessed for gang activity. They are assessed for mental health needs, because we do not want to bring them into our facility if we cannot keep them safe, if we cannot keep you safe, and we cannot minister to their actual tangible needs. So that's for everybody's well-being, and we have a track record of doing that well. An interesting thing about the community aspect is that we do have a shelter, as Lucas referenced, in West Michigan. We have had that location for years, and we have literally had community members tell us, we did not know you were there. That is how secure this is. That is how low risk this is. It does not mean a child won't leave. We can't promise that. This is not a detention facility. I do have a question here. What happens if a child physically leaves the facility? Okay, so I myself have been involved in the quotes for the security systems, the protocol for the alarm systems. Every single hallway, corridor in that building would be outfitted with audio, visual, recorded security systems. If a child were to exit the building, every door has an alarm on it that immediately routes to every staff member's cell phone, including myself, even if I'm not on site. If that child exits the building, if you know the property, well, you all know the property. It's not around a residential area directly. There's a residential trailer park home behind it. Otherwise, it's on an industrial farming strip there. Okay. So, regardless, a child exits the building. Well, okay. Okay. Again, I'm just trying to answer the question. Okay. So if a child exits the building, again, these children are the lowest risk. They've never demonstrated a harm historically when we've worked with them. We would work directly with the community. We would work directly with law enforcement, and we've already started to reach out and develop rapport in that sense. So, but, I think it's important to not forget the fact that that's the protocol, but we genuinely have not had that happen in the history of our residential facilities.
So I'll answer directly what you're asking. In the 8 years that we've had the program, we have had a youth leave without staff present. We had one youth leave in 8 years because he was tired of waiting for the reunification, and he left on his own to go to where his family was. That was away from the community. And that is, I believe, the only time that I'm aware that the police were ever had to even get involved in the program, because once a youth leaves the program, you have to call the police.
Yep, and that would be our plan here. All right. So I have a question here. Does Bethany receive money per child, is the question. Trying to, yeah, you can. The short answer is no, we don't receive money per child. Bethany is a nonprofit. We receive money for the work that we put in. In this sense, it is the contract. So we literally are paid for the people that we are employing, and the staff and the money that we need to physically run the facility. We absolutely do not receive money per child. That's not how it works. And again, we have a governing contract that we must adhere to. Hannah can elaborate a little bit on the contract.
So all of the programming that's I do care. That's why we're here. All of the money that is provided to care for unaccompanied children in this entire network, we only provide a small fraction of all the beds, Bethany, as an agency. So when we say we've had one AWOL, our agency has only had one AWOL. So if you're watching the news and you're seeing other things, we can't speak to that. Our programs and our history, because of the level of kids that we serve and the programs that we run and the trust that we instill in our kids that we are working for the benefit of reunifying with their family, they want to stay with us. I'm working on it. We are a small portion of the programs in this entire system that ORR facilitates to care for kids. That system is funded by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is a department of the Department of Health and Human Services of the federal government. So we all receive, yes, we all receive federal contract dollars to pay for these programs. That ensures that the child's well-being, that they are cared for throughout our programming. that all of the things that are stipulated in those regulations in our immigration law, that we're able to provide those in an individualized manner for each kid as they come through our program.
I'm going to answer one more question, then we're going to turn it over to Pamela to ping back and have her answer some. Okay, so Hannah answered the contract question. Another question I have here is, what is the benefit monetarily to the city of Alma and the residents therein? So we explained the contract and the funding. We are paid to complete this program and do that well. There is no cost to the community. We have no financial cost to the community. I'm not going to talk over people. If you want me to answer the questions, I will. Guys, I'm trying to get there. Okay. So we get paid by the contract, like I was saying. We get paid just to run the facility, do that well. That's the bottom line. In terms of how it benefits the community or what goes back into the community, we're not doing fundraising. Our goal, and we have no agenda to do competition with local nonprofits. We're not going to be fundraising locally to take away from the community. So monetarily, we are not taking away from the community. We are putting back money very practically back into the community by leasing the building itself, which is currently vacant. I'll wait. Leasing it because it is actually currently vacant. We would actually be putting money back into the community because we would be buying things from the community. We do need to feed these children. We do need to clothe these children. These are all conditions of our contract. There is money that is going back into the local community. We've already been intentional with reaching out to local entities to see how we can be very intentional with not outsourcing and keeping it local. We're leasing the building from the Masonic team, yes, but the other resources do not go back to the Masonic team. They go direct to the community. Depending on who we hire, if they already exist in the Alma community or not, those people would likely be moving into or moving about the Alma community, right? So buying everything from a pizza for lunch to more than that. So we see this as a financial benefit for that reason. So hopefully that answers some of your financial questions. I'll turn it over to Pamela.
Okay, I'm back. Looks like I want to answer some questions. Please keep it down. Keep it down so I can answer questions, okay? So this is with respect to asylum. Besides their testimonials, what proof do we have that they are in immediate trouble and have had trouble? How difficult is the process to gain legal citizenship? So there's two parts to this question. With respect to how do you know that their story is real? That's what you're really asking. How do you know that they've been harmed? How do you know if they're going to suffer future harm? All right. I do a lot of asylum. Not necessarily just kids. I do asylum for all ages from different countries. How we prove their case is usually through country reports that are from human rights organizations and the Department of State, and articles from all types of newspapers all over the world that will corroborate exactly the type of harm that they suffer and why. That's one. Secondly, if they have suffered extreme torture or persecution, they have scars for that, okay? I'm not talking in the sense of children only, but this is an asylum case and it's all treated the same. I usually will ask a child, well, not so much, I didn't have a child to have this, but any person that has claimed asylum and persecution, go to your doctor, tell them you're doing this for your attorney, have your doctor take pictures of your scars and bring them to me. We are submitting them. All right? Not only in the U.S., but they also have gone to a doctor, typically abroad. Okay? So they'll have a foreign medical report. They will have an American medical report. We will have country conditions that are corroborating their story, and of course, their affidavit. These asylum officers are so trained. They are so trained to hear your claim, and they are so good at trying to figure out if you are lying. They are excellent at it. I sit through the process. I know how it goes. And remember, if it fails in the asylum office, it goes to court where the ICE attorney is very aggressive, all right, to figure this truth out. If the client is found credible, then they get asylum. That is how we figure out their case. It is not just because they say they claim that they've been persecuted. Everything you claim in asylum has to have support, all right? And if you don't have the physical support to show it, then it is your credibility, your consistency in your story, no matter how it is asked. If you answer it the same way, it's probably true, all right? Okay, so that's one way. And how difficult is the process to gain legal citizenship? I'm assuming this is after somebody has had an asylum status. Whoever asked this, I'm going to address it this way because there's many ways, many routes to getting citizenship, okay? But if you're talking about an asylum status, after 1 year of being an asylee, you can apply to become a permanent resident, which is not the same as a citizen. Remember, citizens can vote, permanent residents cannot, all right? Citizens cannot get deported, usually. Permanent residents can, all right? So, how difficult is it? It depends. It depends on your background. If you have not committed, okay, so first you have to be a permanent resident for 5 years. In that 5 years, you better have a clean record because the government requires you have a clean record. That's criminal, that's paying your taxes, and that is having good moral character. And, you know, if you can show that you've been here consistently for the last 5 years without trouble, you can become a citizen so long as you're willing to pledge allegiance to the country and pass the civics exam, which is 100 questions that can be out of a pool of 100 questions. You will be asked 10 questions, and you have to get 6 right. And you remember, a lot of these folks don't speak English, so this is a real difficult process for some. And then they have to be able to show that they can read and write. And if they pass all that, then they can take the oath and become a citizen. So depending on your personal competence and your background, it could be an easy process or it could be a difficult process. That's one question. If a child comes into this country with no paperwork, you say they can return to their country of origin or travel the world. How do they get a passport without a birth certificate? Just on their word. It isn't just on their word. There is such a thing as secondary evidence. Just because you're here, it doesn't mean you can't obtain a birth certificate. They have consulates from their countries in America. It may not be in Michigan. It could be in Washington. It could be in Illinois, in Chicago, wherever it is. But they can go and get a passport so long as they can prove their identity, whether it's a birth certificate that they can get, all right? You know, we're very tech savvy. Even though they don't have technology necessarily, somehow if they go to a local Kinko's equivalent, they can scan me something. It's not easy for them. It's a whole day's event for them, for many of them that live in the bush or live in like rural areas. This is not an easy process for people. But once we can show that it is them, their birth certificate, and the consulate confirms it, then they can get a passport, all right? And so once you have a passport and you become a lawful permanent resident, you can travel, all right? Just like any other person can travel. Lawyer, should one of these boys enter our land and commit a crime, who is legally responsible for them, and what retribution is sought for legal citizens protecting their property on child. Okay, so who is legally responsible for them? I'll answer part of this, and Bethany, you can answer another. So typically, like any individual, you commit a crime, you're responsible for yourself, all right? You will be, no matter what your status is, you fall under the laws of the city, the state, federally. So you are going to be responsible for your crime, okay? Bethany, do you want to answer part of that?
Yeah, the youth are in federal custody, so the federal government is overseeing the youth as well.
I was just going to add, they're actually held to a higher standard as they are in federal custody. So if children in federal custody were to commit a crime, that would or could resolve in them immediately being removed from this country.
Community or
The country. It isn't funny, but it isn't funny, and I'm not going to get into hypotheticals, but I am going to say that a lot of these children coming in are victims of sexual abuse, and so they deserve, if anything, they deserve. But doesn't that mean then that they deserve our love and compassion and care?
Okay, so there's another question. Please be quiet. Please be quiet. I want to answer a question. Okay? So they have already violated our laws by being here. So that's one that is not correct. Asylum is international law and national. Okay? Internationally, people who seek refuge from persecution are allowed to seek asylum here legally. All right? So anyone knowingly who brings them here should be responsible, both financially and legally. Well, they usually are. People who are here, and if their child comes here or if their nephew or nieces are here, they do take care of them, and they're happy to take care of them, okay? So there, for that one. Does the Masonic home accept responsibility for crimes? That's a unique question. Does the Masonic home accept responsibility for crimes?
I can try and answer that the best I can. I don't speak for the Masonic home. I will say that I think the Masonic home has done a great job of speaking for themselves. And so if you have a question for them, I think that they would answer that. Again, I can't speak for them. I can't speak for them.
Okay, this is my last question. Those speaking, if you want to ask me a question, please write on a card. As far as we know, some of these teens could be trained terrorists. If we have any violent mishaps, who will be held responsible? Again, if anybody commits a crime, the person who commits the crime is responsible. Okay? I'm sorry, I didn't understand what. Of course you can do something about it. Of course, just whether it's an immigrant child or an unaccompanied child, if somebody hurts your child, like in any other situation, you call the police investigate, charges are made, and they go through prosecution if there are charges, and then And then they pay by the sentence, right? This is how our criminal justice works.
We've done our best to date to communicate with local existing entities, nonprofits. So the entities that are currently in your community that provide the supports for these children already in your community, so not this population, but community members, we've already had conversations with them about how we would handle that well, and we are already on the same page about that. So of course, we can't wave a magical wand. We can't guarantee that a child won't exit our facility, but we've already demonstrated the statistics, and we've already connected with the community and been ahead of that conversation instead of behind it.
So I'd like to answer this question. Why does Bethany Christian Services not go to other countries to help these kids? Is it because Bethany gets more money from our federal government through filing as a 501c3b, tax-free? Bethany would love to go to other countries to help serve other children. We are actually an international, excuse me, we are an international agency. Actually, we're in 7 countries and over 33 states here in the United States. We actually were born out of domestic services, so when we talk about caring for our own, we also are very passionate about that. We provide domestic services for children, for pregnant and parenting mothers and new mothers, and that's how we had and built the expertise through foster care to then enter into the work of caring for immigrant children. Because we also believe that God's love extends to all children, which is why we care for both those domestically and for children that are children of immigrants.
So let's talk a little bit about that. We do have programs in country, yes. The answer is yes. No, I didn't say I didn't know that answer.
We do not have programs in every single country in Central America. Right. Do we have some in 2 countries? Yes.
All right, so I want to make sure I answer some of the questions again that are specific to in the house, so physically in the building. There's a couple questions here about the actual support services that are provided. One of the questions is specific to language. Yes, we are providing the language needs and assisting the language needs. We are focusing on hiring bilingual individuals. I'll add that that is actually a requirement of the Office of Refugee and Resettlement, is that we prioritize bilingual speakers, again, to minister to these children's language and their needs. This shelter is also sometimes called a transitional assessment center, because that's, again, not a detention facility. That is what we are doing. We're trying to meet their needs. We will have teachers that are bilingual. We have teacher assistants in classrooms. We will have bedrooms and beds and amenities for the children. We will have clinicians. We will have youth specialists, peer supports. Again, I think Lucas said over 50 people. So I want to make sure I get to that question. We kind of, for a minute, got away from what's happening in the house. But I really want to emphasize that we are here to care for children. I have another question here that says, how does this action benefit Bethany? This is not for our benefit. We are here to meet the need. And there are other nonprofits that I can work for. But I choose not to. I choose to be here because Bethany does that well. and we want to show up for those kids, and we will. Every single day. We would not be here if we were not here for the kids.
I want to let you know we're going to end this. I want to thank Pamela Davies, the panelists from Bethany, all our volunteers, the Michigan Peace Team, our technical staff, especially from Resonate Productions, and you all know there's a public hearing, I think. You right know this on rezoning on July 12th at 6 p.m., apparently now at Alma High School. So thank you for coming, and have safe travels home.